What is the kingdom of God like? One of the questions we love to ask others is to explain to us in detail something that they have experienced in their life, especially if it regards something very interesting and we want to know more about. For example, let's say you have a friend who went on vacation to someplace nice, like Hawaii, for example, or the Caribbean. When your friend returns, you really want to know what their vacation was like, right? You would ask, well, what was Hawaii like? And you would hope that they would explain to you how they had a good time, what the stories were like, what the adventures were like. And of course, you may even ask them to share pictures of their travel with you so you can truly see for yourself what it was like there. All these points we just mentioned serve to communicate, what we want to know more about when our friends went on vacation. You see, we hear stories and we listen to them communicate, and we want to know more, right? We want to know so that we can, in a certain sense, experience what they've experienced, which then leads into what I would like to share today. You see, consider this. Jesus explains to his disciples about the kingdom of God. And in order for him to do so, he explains to them through analogies. One of the ways Jesus does this is through parables. You see, Jesus knows what the kingdom of God is like, but we don't know what the kingdom of God is like. So in order for Jesus to communicate what the kingdom of God is like to us, he does so through parables. Parables, which are stories that are designed to illustrate the truth of the kingdom. You see, the idea is to get us to imagine what the kingdom of God is like. Very similar to the story we just mentioned. So then in the Gospel of St. Mark, chapter 4, verses 26 to 34, we have two parables. And as we've noticed, these two parables are about planting. The first is the scattering of the seed, and the second is the growing of the mustard seed. Now, if you think about it, analogies help because they give us a good grasp of what the kingdom of God is like. It helps us to think, to imagine, to visualize in our minds the kingdom of God. But if you think about it, analogies can only go so far as to explain the concept. The reason for this is because it is very difficult, if not impossible, to attempt to explain the concept, that is the kingdom. And the reason for this is because it's really impossible for us to grasp with our finite minds what we can experience firsthand as actually being here. Our finite minds can only go so far to try to understand the infinite. We can only then go so far as to imagine what the kingdom of God is like. The rest we see through faith, right, which is a very important word, faith, which is why St. Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 7 says, we walk by faith and not by sight, because our eyesight is finite. If we can only take us so far. But then it is through faith that we can see. We can see not with our eyesight, but in a manner that leads us to the kingdom of heaven. We can see into the spiritual life and we can walk that spiritual path through faith. So here, I'd like to share two ideas for us to reflect on further in the Gospel of St. Mark, chapter 4, verses 26 to 34, on two parables. The first about the scattering of the seeds and the second about the planting of the mustard seed. And just a reminder too, to please remember to subscribe to this YouTube channel to receive weekly reflections on faith. So let's get started. Point number one, the seed scattered on the ground in the mustard seed. Maybe some of us enjoy planting things. In order to convey what the kingdom of God is like, Jesus uses two parables about planting to explain the message of the kingdom. Here's what the first parable says. Jesus says to the crowds, "This is how it is with the kingdom of God. It is as if a man were to scatter seed on the land and would sleep and rise night and day. Through it all, the seed would sprout and grow. He knows not how. Of its own accord, the land yields fruit. First the blade, then the ear, then the full grain in the ear. And when the grain is ripe, he wheels the sickle at once, for the harvest has come." Now, as you can see here, the kingdom of God is compared to a tiny seed. The seed seems to be insignificant and not worthy of anything, and it gets scattered everywhere. But then if placed in the right soil and under the right conditions, the seed begins to grow and grow and grow. And over the course of time, it becomes something truly big and massive. So then in a certain sense, the kingdom of God is described as our faith. Think about this. Faith is like a small seed that is planted in our heart. Each one of us has the seed of faith planted inside us. Now, we all have a choice of what we want to do with that seed. Do we want to nurture it? Do we want to put it in the right environment where it can grow? It's clear that if we allow the seed to be nourished in the right soil and in the right environment, it will grow to become a large tree. And so in the second parable, the parable about the mustard seed growing into this big, large tree where the birds can find shade in it, here's what Jesus says. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed that when it is sown in the ground is the smallest of all the seeds on the earth. But once it is sown, it springs up and becomes the largest of plants and puts forth large branches so that the birds of the sky can dwell in its shade. Friends, here's the thing. The mustard seed is indeed not the smallest of all seeds. But remember that this is a parable used to describe the kingdom of God. And so like the first parable, the kingdom of God seems insignificant at the beginning, but then it can grow into something big and massive. It can grow into a big, large tree from such a tiny, tiny seed. Which then brings us to our second point I'd like to share here. And that is the two parables invite us to work in building up God's kingdom here on earth. The two parables invite us to work in building up this kingdom here on earth. If we take a look around the world today, there seems to be a lot of problems. Problems with inequality, problems with injustice, lots and lots of problems out there. And sometimes we can always just focus on the problem and say, well, there's so much going on. I don't even know where to start, where to begin in building up God's kingdom, right? But as disciples of Jesus Christ, as disciples, we are called to build up the kingdom of God. And we do this by practicing love and charity every day. And while we can't solve all the world's problems, we can affect those around us. We can make present the kingdom of God to those whom we meet every day. And the reality is this, all of us meet a lot of people every day, right? From the moment we wake up, we get dressed, we go out into the public, we encounter people every day. And, if we live with our families, even just among our family as well, if we can learn to practice love and charity, that's the place to start. That's the place to begin to work in building up the kingdom of God. And so then in a real sense, while there are many challenges in the world today, Jesus presents us with these two parables to help us to set our sights beyond just the everyday challenges and struggles we encounter and to make Jesus present in every circumstance. Now, I understand too, something like this is not easy, right? It's so easy just to fall into this temptation of saying, well, you know what, there's so much going on, so much craziness in the world, well, I'll just follow what the world has to offer. Instead of taking a step back, pausing, reflecting, and then seeing how we can affect that change. And so, friends, Jesus invites us this day, as his disciples, to seek to build up the kingdom of God here on earth. And he gives us two parables to do so. These two parables illustrate that even something so insignificant, our faith, or this insignificant action that we do, can have great effects, on others and on people. And so then, reflect on this very question. What are you doing this day to make present the kingdom of God in the world to those you meet? May God bless you.